Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, where we focus on how authors found success, looking at strategies that have taken them to the top of the bestseller charts, as well as what they've learned from their mistakes. Because being an indie author is more than knowing the latest marketing trend. It's about being innovative and creative and learning from your mistakes. Your co-hosts, Jamie Albright and Sarah Rosette, couldn't be more different. In fact, they're a study in contrasts. However, despite all of their differences, they agree that sharing what they wish they'd known, both the good and the bad, is the key to moving forward. Let's get to the show.
Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sarah Rosette.
And I'm Jamie Albright. And today we have Joe Solari. And I think you guys are going to be really happy and interested in this podcast. I know I was.
It's a really good interview. And we talk about this whole COVID-19 thing and how to approach it from a business owner's point of view, like mindset, making plans for short-term and long-term. Really good stuff, really helpful.
Yeah, Joe's really smart, and he's been helping in the author community for a while with their just giving financial advice and helping them with planning and stuff. And I think that, I took some notes and learned quite a bit during this thing. So
we need all the help we can get right now. So this is good. All right. So here's the interview. Joe Solari is an author, entrepreneur, and consultant. He writes on the topics of energy, the environment, and on how to reduce risk in your entrepreneurial ventures. Joe graduated with a BFA from the School of the Art Institute and an MBA from the Chicago Booth School of Business. He has been an owner, investor, partner, and operator of numerous businesses. So we're really excited to have Joe Solari with us here today. How are you doing, Joe?
I'm doing great.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, good to see you again.
Glad to have you here. So tell us, how did you get into helping writers?
Well, yeah, that's not the kind of thing you draw with your crayons as a little kid, right? That I'm going to grow up and help writers. And so it's like anything, it's one of these weird paths. And I think before I kind of give you the blow by blow of how I got here, understand kind of one of the things that I've learned and I bring to everything is the idea of connection and helping there be some kind of creativity, whether it's my own or people I'm working with. And so, for example, like when I meet somebody, I'm trying to think about how I can help them, who I know may be able to help them, or who they could help that I know, right? So with that as kind of a background, my business career started out in industrial water treatment and the oil and gas industry, so it had nothing to do with authors. And when I was running my last, kind of bigger business, it was an oil and gas services business. We had raised $21 million in 18 months, and I was like doing crazy stuff with, publicly traded investors. And my wife mentions that she's going to write a book. And like most husbands, I gave it about 25% of my attention, right? It's like, yeah, it's great, honey. And then I was off doing my stuff. And then one day she came to me, she said, hey, I'm having some issues with this Amazon account. And I'm kind of the tech person in the house. So I take a look, and it wasn't the Amazon account. It was a KDP account, which I'd never heard of, right? And I see that there's $4,000 sitting in her account.
And you went,
So I suddenly got really interested, right? Like, what's this whole self-publishing thing? And knowing that this was going to be important to her, and that I started going down that rabbit hole, right? Listening to podcasts and understanding. And I mean, this is a deep rabbit hole once you start going after it, right? And then kind of fast forward, I sold that business, and it was deciding what I was going to do. And I was like, well, she was successful with that. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book about business operations, like all my scar tissue that I've developed over the years, helping small business owners understand the operational piece, the stuff you can't learn at a business school and people don't tell you. It's not aspirational. It's like what you need to do, nuts and bolts with the business. And weird thing is, you put out a book, you never know who's going to respond to it. I started having indie authors contact me. And one of them was Craig Martell and the 20 Books Group. And I got pulled into that to the point of where they asked me to come speak at their first conference. And that's where I really got my mind blown, because I was meeting authors. I really didn't have a feel for like how big this fiction piece had gotten.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm meeting authors, and they're like, I had this one particular author. He's like, yeah, I made $50,000. And I was like, well, that's pretty good for a year selling books. And he's like, and I think next month, I've got a new release. It'll probably be closer to 70 or 80,000. I'm like, a month? He's like, yeah. And it's like, but you just told me you quit your job like 4 months ago. Like, so granted, you meet people there that have never written a book too. But the point is that I saw the scope of this business, and I was getting a lot of people there asking me, for help. Like, hey, I need accounting help. Hey, I need bookkeeping help. Hey, I need this kind of help. And that's where, getting back to what I first brought up, that's where things start to connect for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, I'm not an accountant. I'm a business guy that knows a lot about accounting, but I have people that I know. So like, I was like, well, I know this lady who's a CPA. Her name's Lisa Gardina. She used to work for Oprah Winfrey.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And she's really good with kind of the financial piece, and she helped our businesses over time. I wonder if Lisa'd be interested. So I called her up, and that became the foundation of us being able to help authors and build a business system for authors. As Lisa partnered with me, and we just started helping first these high net worth authors, helping them. And then from there, we realized, hey, there's this business system we have. There's this process that authors need to deal with. A lot of it is, let's say 70% of it's just like basic small business stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 30% is really specific to being an author. And most accountants don't understand it. So that's what we've kind of gone out and helped other authors, or, gone out in the community and helped them, whether it's through books or courses or like this back office thing we do for some folks.
That's
great. Yeah, that's great, because the author business is we're a little under the radar. Like you were saying, a lot of people don't know. And then once you start making money, there's not a lot of people who specifically understand how that works. As Jamie and I have discovered.
Our accountant, we went back to an accountant we used like years ago. We had a business, and so we went back to him when my income started going up, and my husband called him and said, she's writing, and he said, oh, I have other authors, and we were like, great. And then my husband goes in and gives him the information. He's like, it's kind of the same thing. She made this in a year. And Chris said, yeah. And he said, okay, my other authors don't do this. And so, which made me nervous, but he's done pretty well. But I see what you're saying. They're just things they don't get.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you another good one as example with the author thing. That's like, we just accept as something you do, and accountants actually really hate. And Lisa's learned to deal with it. Right. And that's PayPal.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like authors or accountants are like, don't do that. You should do this, all this other way. And it's like, no, you don't understand. There's this whole contractor ecosystem built around that. You have to use it. You're expected to use it. And the fact that it's hard for you to, get your books to balance in QuickBooks, like that's your problem. Suck it up, Buttercup. You figure it out. Right.
It's true.
And I'm constantly, it's probably about once a quarter, I have to have Lisa go into my QuickBooks account and be like, can you fix all my PayPal stuff again?
Yeah.
And she tells me.
Yeah, but it can be a challenge too. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've seen some, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great CPAs out there that know what they're doing, but we've seen some stuff that's just, they didn't know what to do. So they tried to do stuff and it's wrong. Mm-hmm. And in the end, they're not going to pay your tax bill. Right?
Very true. Well, let's pivot a little bit and talk about like what's going on in the world. One reason we wanted to talk to you was just this whole COVID-19 thing. Give us sort of your assessment of what's going on with that right now for authors, and then sort of what do you see the impacts long term?
Sure. So, when when this first started coming onto the news scene and I saw stuff that was going on in China, my initial approach was thinking about it like a lot of the other outbreak epidemic things that have happened. And like typically they get overreaction, right? If you look at what happens in the stock market, there's some significant sell-off, but it comes back really quickly. And none of the previous outbreaks have caused a recession. They may have made some people lose money short term in the stock market, but they haven't caused an economic impact. And so my initial thinking was like, well, that's probably what this is going to be. But it quickly changed. And when I saw a guy named John Bullard, who's the president of the St. Louis Fed, speak, and he said that they're looking for a planned shutdown of the economy to combat this. And this was like, February-ish timeframe, and that they expected that it would be 50% of the U.S. GDP. Right. So now that's great that it's planned. It's not something like a past recession-causing event like the mortgage crisis, where like there was just monkey shines going on and then it all broke apart. This is, we all know why it's happening, is we're being told not to go into work. You can't go to certain places. Like even if you like to eat out, too bad. Like all this stuff. When you take an economy as big as the United States and you shut it down, it's going to have a long-term impact. So like, how do we look at that? If you look at past recessions, they typically take about 1,000 days to go from the peak down to whatever their bottom is, back to where they were. So there's going to be this long-term play out. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to be like living in our houses for the next 1,000 days. What I'm saying is that when you think about how the economy goes in these up and down waves, you have to have a short-term and a long-term approach and understand that you're going to have, maybe up to 3 years where it takes for things to get back to normal, right? To be a little more positive about this, think about this. Like, the world's been through a lot of huge epidemics, right? Like we talk about the Spanish flu. That was 100 years ago, right? And at that time when that happened, medical technology was at the peak of the time, right? Like compared to 100 years before that, they knew stuff that was like space age, right? But they were still like, treatment was enemas and whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my reason I bring that up is like, as poorly as that was handled based on that time frame, the economy bounced back. And where we are today is so much better economically and health and everything than it was then. So like, it always gets better. Like we think it's good. We always say, the old used to be better in the old times. No, it didn't. Like, I don't want to go live back when the Romans lived. I want to look at now. So I think you have to think about this a couple ways, is that there's going to be this time that we have to get through short term. And then what are you going to do long term with your business? Did that help?
Yep. Yeah. So tell us what some of the short term things that an author can do.
Sure. So, and we talked a little bit this before we got on the call. It's like one of my big things, what message I want to get across to authors is that, if you're like Jamie here, who's, just turned 25, she's got probably another 60 years in your career?
At least.
So this won't be your only downturn, right? So what we want to do is we want to get you through this one. Like if you don't survive this one, you don't get to enjoy the future ones. And then taking some things to prepare so you do, so the future ones aren't as impactful. And that's the problem, is usually when I thought about the author community, a lot of folks, this not only may be their first economic downturn, but it's the first time that they're doing this as a entrepreneur, where they are the sole business owner and they're responsible for their full income. And that's
maybe
scary.
the whole household. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of times with like a lot of our clients is like, they're the big breadwinner, like, and just recently maybe made some decisions for the hubby to leave his job and come work, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So stressful. Yeah.
Very, very stressful, right? So how do we think through that? So you're familiar with the hero's journey, right?
Correct.
Right. Everybody. So like, why does that resonate so much? Well, it's because it's the whole idea of an unlikely hero saving the world, right? Having to go through these circumstances that are pretty terrible. Well, that's life. Like that's what you're going to go through right now. You have to think about yourself as kind of being that unlikely hero. And you're going to have to go through this process and learn some things that are going to help you save your world. Right. And so I think that, again, getting to the short-term stuff, first thing you have to do is you have to write. Like, I know for myself, it has been really, really hard to stay focused. It's so easy to get pulled into what the latest news cycle is, and really getting that writing done so that you're, from a business perspective, you're producing, right? You have to make the donuts if you're running a donut shop, but also just like your writing is an escape for your readers, your customers. For most writers that I know, this is their daydream world. Like it's a good place to go. So go there. Go hang out with your characters in a nice town where they don't have COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's one thing. The other part of this is stress testing your business. Like it can get scary, but looking at what happens if your business plan is not met, right? So I guess there's this first step before that is like, do you even have a plan? A lot of folks don't, right? And if, let me give you an example. So most authors that are in KDP, say 70%, 60-70% of their revenue comes from KDP, right? And while KDP may be more resistant to downturns because it's a subscription service and it's just people can, no matter what, the $9 that it costs is the $9, right? And they can read as much as they want. But if that other 30% of your business is sales, and sales drop by 50%, your revenue just dropped by 15%. What does that mean for your business? And if you don't look at that ahead of time, then you don't know how to react, right?
Right.
So one of the things we've done is we've stress test all of our authors' businesses. I've got a spreadsheet we can provide links to. It's free. You don't have to give me your email or anything like that. It's just something you can put your plan into and then test at these different levels. And then you understand, like, okay, if I see that my sales are coming off, what am I going to do? What are the things I'm going to cut? What are the things I'm going to pull back on, right? And some authors are in some pretty precarious places when it comes to when you look at authors that are spending 30% of their profits on advertising, right? So
yeah. I had to mute because we got a baby in the other room getting his apple. But yes, definitely. I'm there. Yeah.
And so, that's the other thing is like how do you cycle through those kind of things? And as scary as this may sound for some folks, this may be the time where you cut back on advertising because you have no reference point to what it's going to do for you, right? And the reality is that people aren't on Amazon looking for books and leisure stuff, right? So, and believe me, Amazon's going to do fine. They'll be around at the end of this thing. So, sometimes it's just, authors are in a good spot because when you look at, say, that the idea of cutting back on your advertising today, that's dollars saved today that you get to keep because holding on to cash is really important. So if you're spending, say, $10,000 a month on advertising or $1,000 a month, percentage wise, it's the same for your business, 30%. You hold that money today, and then you're going to see the impact And let's say no matter what, your sales are probably going to drop, right? Now, how much of that is just the conditions of the market, and how much of that is because you cut back advertising? You've got 60 days to get prepared, because that cash isn't coming for another 60 days. So you're really going back into some real business basics of cash flow management, and a dollar that you can hold on today is worth more to you.
So you would recommend that authors really concentrate on controlling their spending. And then would you also recommend they maybe see if they can find other ways to bring in income besides just book sales? Or do you think what would you recommend?
Well, I think that, I'm a big proponent of finding multiple channels for your revenue. And I think that we're in a golden age of content creation. And this blip isn't stopping that. It's going to be bigger and better, right? Mm-hmm. Your intellectual property has all different kinds of ways to make money. And if you were in a strong financial position, like if you're if you're an author that's sitting on a bunch of cash, and you can be proactive and aggressive in a downturn, that's really what you want to do. If you're in that position, right? If you can do that stuff where you can be aggressive with audiobooks, but you also have to understand, like, if you were thinking, hey, I'm going to go and start releasing subscription boxes around my characters, there might be a little problem with that right now when people, your community is not, they're holding their money back, right? They may love your characters and want to do it, but $75 for a subscription box right now is money they need because they think their husband's going to get laid off, right? So you have to think kind of these things cascade, right? It's just like the Chinese market's not going to recover until we recover because they sell us most of their stuff. Well, that's the same thing at the author level and at the community level and all these. We're all tied together. Mm-hmm. And when we see this constraint happen on spending two ways, one, either people lose their jobs, or two, they listen to advice like mine, and I'm telling you to hold on to your money, mm-hmm. right? Everyone starts holding on to their money. Nobody's spending money.
Right.
Now, the flip side of that is how the government is going to get us out of this is they are going to create a ton of new money and push it out into the system. And we saw they were successful with that after 2008. So they're going to run that same playbook again, except they're going to do it times 10x. Mm-hmm. And so what you'll see is when the recovery comes back, it will come back, and the stock market will go way, way higher because that money has nowhere else to go, and people will spend more on discretionary. But we have to go through the cycle. And that's the bigger story for authors here, is that this won't be your only cycle, right? So like, get through this first one, and then, take the time to figure out what you need to get in place. So when the next one happens, you're better prepared.
Okay. Are there any more short-term things that you can think of before we go on?
No, I think that's, really the big thing is conserving your cash. And I would just add into that, because most authors, this is, even if they have a more formalized structure, like they have an LLC set up and they have they've got it set up as an S Corp and all the stuff we talk about. In the end, the business money and the family money is kind of the same. So you really have to look at those two layers, right? Like, is there stuff that has to be cut back at the family level? What are the essentials and what are the just kind of nice to haves? Because, the same goes for the business. What are those things where you can conserve cash? You may find out in 4 weeks' time that you can go back to how you were spending, but you're not going to outspend an economic downturn.
Yeah, we're not the government. We can't take the same approach.
Well, and look at
money.
Right. And look at what happens. You bring up a good point there, is like, even though they can literally produce money out of thin air, mm-hmm. it has to be put into the economy. Mm-hmm. And, for example, there's all this talk about the economic impact disaster loans and the payroll protection program. I get all these acronyms all messed up. So it's like, then you hear guys, you're going to get a check for $10,000, and like, okay, well, let's put this into perspective. The guys that do loans, these small banks, They do about $30 billion a year in loans. All of a sudden, they're told to do $350 billion in loans. So 10x. We want you to do it now.
Yeah.
Okay. And, all your employees are at home because we told you to shelter in place. Why aren't you getting the money out?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So until that money gets through that system, and by the way, the people that are doing that job, they want to do their job right. So they have certain boxes that they have to tick, and they have to walk you through a process. And so until you get through that, that money doesn't get into place. So I think that authors have to think the same way, is that you even if you have the cash, what are you going to spend it on that's going to be effective? And we were talking about, if there's creating a new revenue stream, probably not create a new revenue stream, but it might be the opportunity to do some things that you may have been holding back on that are solid revenue streams, like getting some more audiobooks produced because your audio narrator's free now.
And that will eventually pay off.
Yeah, that's going to pay off.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
Well,
I will tell you, I'm embarrassed about how much money we have saved this month, though. Not going out to eat, not going to the movie because I love to go to the movie. I mean, just things like that. It's a little bit embarrassing. And I will tell you that my husband is not the spender.
Yeah.
I said I'm becoming more and more like my grandparents every day. I'm like, no, don't throw that away. There's a little more hand gel left in that box.
In the bottom of that thing.
Yeah, don't throw that away.
Well, one of the other businesses I work on is a family business. It's my father-in-law's business. It's a 100-year-old home brewing supply business. It's actually doing really well in this economy. But a lot of the things that he does is because he's a child of the Depression. Mm-hmm. And right now, he seems like the smartest guy in the room.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right? Because he's sitting on a ton of cash. He can be really aggressive. He doesn't have to worry about how payroll is going to be met. Now, what other times people are like, why is he holding on to all his money? Well, because he's been through these things and he understands that it's not that you're not trying to predict this stuff. You're trying to prepare for it, right? Because it's never the same thing twice, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So having that cash reserve, all of a sudden makes him just sleep better at night.
Yeah. So that's one of the long-term things you can do, right? Is have some cash. So let's talk about that a little bit. What long-term things should we be thinking about for down the road? Right.
So, and this is, there's two parts to this really. There's how you want to get the business prepared for something like a downturn like this. But also I think with authors, they forget the whole idea of having a business like this is that it's to serve them, right? It needs to be designed in a way that it creates the life that they want. Now, whatever that is, you have to decide. And a lot of times they don't think that way. If in your business, not only are you the employee and the business manager and the head of marketing, but you're also the investor, right? And the investors' needs trump everybody's because it's their money that's in this thing. So what do you as the investor want out of this thing long term? Are you trying to pay down debt? Are you trying to put kids through school? All that kind of stuff needs to be part of that plan. Underlying that, you start to need to get the business to be more robust, right? And so that means changing how you do your planning of the business, where I know a lot of people have been very, very aggressive, and this gets us back to advertising, where they're tipping all their money back into advertising and making sure that there's, more success on each launch. And I mean, I'm a big believer in that strategy, because when you look at how cumulative advantage works, where each cycle, each launch builds a bigger audience that brings more audience. And I mean, we could talk a whole nother show about that. I mean, that success works, but now you have to think well, I can't tip everything in, right? I need to start working through some things where I know that I have a buffer in my business of whatever makes you comfortable. Now, you kind of have a built-in one with the way Amazon pays you, and that you got that 60 days. But you think about it, whether it's something like this or some change that Amazon makes, how much time do you need to respond and be comfortable? Is it 6 months? Well, then you need to have 6 months buffer, right? And because you're responsible for the whole family, that isn't just the business operating cash flow, but it has to support your family income. Like, you can't fire your one employee.
Right.
Especially if it's your spouse you just hired.
Right. That makes for some interesting.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to lay you off.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true though, because, last year I was very aggressive with my advertising, but it was for a purpose. It was for visibility. I wanted, because I don't have a lot of books, I wanted, I wanted to be seen with other romance authors who do have a lot of books who are doing really well. And it worked. Like I was, but this year my goal was to kind of make more, spend less sort of thing. So I was sort of already on that path, but, and right now I am, but I don't, it's scary. It's scary to think if I just put a little bit more in, I can maybe make a little bit more. So, it's like, but that's good advice.
Yeah, well, and I think that I was already working on this with some of my authors, because, some of the folks that I'm working with, like, they're the name everybody else is advertising on.
Yeah.
So where do those people go, right? Like, and to make them move in rank, they're already spending tens of thousands of dollars in advertising. So,
right.
So one of the things that we were looking at, and I think is relevant in this space, is like, well, where is the best advertising, not advertising, but where's your best marketing dollar spent? And I think there's going to be a fundamental shift in how authors do this stuff. And you're starting to see it manifest out in the community, where the money isn't going to Amazon and Facebook. The money is going into their community, right? So they're doing things to directly engage with their community, whether it's, giving away stuff, swag, or, we've all kind of done some of that stuff on a smaller level, but really thinking about how you can get more bang for your buck. Because, like, when you do something like you send out launch boxes to your fans, your super fans, and then they take that and start putting that out on social media, and then you leverage that on social media and in your advertising, you start to see this really compounding effect that you don't get with just slamming money into Facebook, right? And, it's just a more genuine thing when it's user-generated content, that your fans are, like, losing their mind over the fact that, they got a copy of your book signed by you as an early release, and there was, whatever there was in the box, or however you're, like, trying to do your thing. Like, I think that stuff is more relevant now, when people are, not only are they cutting back on their spending, but they're kind of freaking out too, right? So, like, if you're kind of engaging your fans on that level, you're tapping into a deeper relationship. Because that's really what you want, is something that's beyond a commercial relationship.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question, because this is a personal question, but I know there are other people out there who have this question, like new releases. I'm releasing a book that is not one of my normal brides books. It's it's still romantic comedy, but it's a different sort of genre. And I have been thinking that I would hold on to it, but just in the last couple of days, I thought, no, I maybe should just release it and see what happens. I don't know. What you're saying, write more. Are you also saying publish more?
Well, no, I'm not. I think you have. I think it's the writing piece is important. That as an author, if you're not comfortable releasing books now for whatever reason, we'll kind of talk about that in a second. Just keep writing, right? It's that production. There's a couple things. One is, it may not be your best work. It may be the foundation of something that can be really great, but because with all the stuff that's going on, and the dog barking, and the kids not being able to log into school, and, like, you're doing something kind of therapeutic and getting the base story out, but like it may need another role. Right? But when you come to thinking about launches right now, I think you just have to be respectful of it's going to be different. You can't be setting expectations that it's going to be better than your last launch.
Right. Okay.
You know, I have the ability to see into a lot of clients, like reader links accounts. So I can see kind of just general trends in page reads and stuff like that. And it looks to me like page reads are down as a whole when I look at, and, you know, I know each one of these cases. So it's like, okay, well, there's a launch that kind of happened here and that. So I think there's just some general weirdness that we have to be respectful of and understand that if you launch a book now, it may not roll out like you think it's going to roll out. But the great thing is that you can revisit that, right? Like,
right, exactly. Yeah, that's sort of where I've come down on. Like, if it doesn't go the way I want, when the second one comes out, I could do something with the first one, you know,
if you do an audiobook, exactly. When the audiobook launches, you can kind of give a boost to the ebook.
There are lots of that. That's the great thing about us. We are nimble. I mean, we can pivot, and, you know, that's what I've always said about KDP. You know, if things change with that, I will pivot, because that's what small businesses do. They
absolutely
pivot. And so, but yeah, it's to look at.
Yeah, and that, you know, that my one concept about the reader-writer relationship, right? That there's the only relationship that matters. The whole ecosystem is built on it is the reader and the writer. Like, if there's no readers, there's no money. Not for you, not for Amazon, not for reader links, not for Joe. It's no money, right? And the readers aren't going to just shell out money unless they get good stories. So like that symbiotic relationship is what everything is built around. And it's going to go to wherever the most beneficial place is for it. Right now it's in KDP, but, you know, somebody could be doing something in their garage that's going to completely revolutionize how people digest that content. And that's where it'll go to, right? So that's where you're absolutely right, Jamie, in that you're going to be able to get there faster than anybody else.
Right.
That's the real power of this community, is because people are listening to podcasts like this and they're like, oh yeah, I think I'll try that. You know, and what's the worst happens? It doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. So what do you wish you'd known about getting through an economic downturn? Because you've been through a couple of them.
I have. And, you know, I think some of the things I'm talking about here is really the stuff that I wish I knew. Like, one of the things that's frustrating for me in this community is that I understand today, because of where I am in my experience, how powerful business tools can be for creating wealth and managing through these kind of situations. And I know that a lot of authors, it isn't that they detest this stuff. It's that they were like I was, you know, 15, 20 years ago, that I just didn't understand that there were these tools to use. Right. And so when I look back and I think about how, you know, I just focused on sales. It's like, there's this particular economic downturn. You know, let's go back to the housing crisis. I was in the building industrial water treatment equipment. A huge part of our business was municipalities, right? So every town that went up, they were using our equipment. All of a sudden, they're not buying anymore. So we were trying to focus on how could we sell more stuff somewhere else. And I never looked at, like, how do I manage the cash, right? And making decisions about, okay, you have to make these cuts, right? Because as small business owners, especially if we have employees, we have emotional relationships with these people. We know their kids. We know what the impact is going to be on them. So we take too long and don't cut deep enough. So that's a big part of it, is like, because now we're talking about the most precious employee you have, like, look at these things and make sure that you're prepared to cut this stuff. Like, what happens if your business has half the sales this year? What you're going to have to do something, right? You're going to do something. Do you want to be something deliberate that you've planned, or, and a lot of times that just makes you have less sleepless nights because it's like, okay, I have this plan. This is what I'm going to do. If this happens, then I'll do that. Now I don't have to lay in bed wondering all these different scenarios. What would I do if that happened in this? It's like, okay.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing is, understanding how I can use business tools. That's something I wish I knew back then, especially cash flow, because cash is king.
Yeah. Cash, especially in an economic downturn. Cash.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you look at, Warren Buffett, right? Where he's made his biggest major moves has been in economic downturns because he knows things are undervalued and people, he has this line about when the tide goes out, you see who doesn't have a bathing suit on. Right? And that's a good time to be selling bathing suits.
Right. That's exactly right.
Right. And, you think some of the most shrewd bankers in the world, Goldman Sachs, right? These guys are deal makers. When the housing crisis hit, they were in so much trouble. They went to him and they needed his money to save that bank and they needed it as a vote of confidence. And he cut a deal that made him billions of dollars with one phone call because he was prepared, right? He had the money and he knew what to do. So I think that having cash now, if you're early in this is your first one, this is about just making sure you got the cash to get to the other side. And that other side may be, 3, 6, 9 months out. We don't know. That's the one thing.
That's the hard part. Yeah.
Right. So you really have to be careful and conserve because, Illinois has been doing pretty well given a big city like Chicago because people have been kind of following the rules. But does that mean we have to follow the rules into June? Maybe.
Yeah, I think Wuhan they were under quarantine for 76 days or something like that. I was saying it wrong the other day. That's why I took a minute to say my family made fun of me about it. But I called it Hunan, but that's the name of my favorite restaurant.
Well, I think that's the right pronunciation. You should tell them that.
But yeah, so we're only like 20-something days in here in Texas, so it could be longer. Yeah.
So. I was just going to say, I think a lot of this is like, I'm risk adverse. And so I don't want to, I like the idea of having savings. So we're pretty well set up, but at the same time, you have to figure out, like, is it worth it to take a small risk, like you were saying, to maybe do certain things that you wouldn't normally do because there's an opportunity. And then you also have to think, there's a lot of things we have to think about because we have to think about, like, is this something that I can there's so many variables. So if we can kind of make some plans where we have some certainty, it will make us feel better instead of just like ignoring the whole thing and just hoping it goes away.
Well, that's it. And, we didn't talk about it, but if you were a person that previously had a full-time job and you were working for someone, and now you're the boss, you're in charge, you may feel a lot more uncertainty and a lot more scared because it's all on you. But I would argue that you have more certainty because everything's aligned in your business. The investor, management, employees, they may have conflicting interests, but they're all your interests.
You're all on the same page.
You're right. And so if you're working for me, and we may have the strong relationship, I've been to your house for barbecues, I know your dog, all that stuff. But in the end, if it's about me getting rid of 20% of my workforce to save 80% and knowing that it's going to get the business to the other side, and you're part of that 20%, sorry, Charlie.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to be broken up about it, and you're going to feel really bad about your situation. You're not even going to think about how many sleepless nights I've had about thinking about breaking that news to you.
Right.
But like, the point is you have so much more control now as a owner of your own business. And by the way, as little as you may know about running your business, the guy who owned the business you work for may have even less knowledge than you. Right. Don't assume just because he just, like, nobody starts a business because they're like, hey, I want to run a business and I want to fill out tax forms and I want to,
That's my dream. Yeah.
right? It's like you got into whatever you got into because you're good at it and it made you money and now you have to have a business, right? And so that's the same for the guy you used to work for. Mm-hmm. Like you're part of the problem when you're an employee. Is like he just wanted to sell insurance. He just happened to need you to answer the phones, right? Like,
yeah.
So I think we if you just understand that, the decisions are yours and you're going to make some bad ones. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I've learned is that you're never, let me put it this way. So I'm a big planner, mm-hmm. right? I make a lot of plans. I can make super fancy plans that get you money. I can make plans like on the back of a napkin that will show you how you can run a whole business. None of those plans have ever been executed exactly per the plan, mm-hmm. right? It's given me an idea of what I'm trying to do, like what the end goals are, and some ways to get there. And then you discover things along the way. And it was Eisenhower that said, plans are useless, but planning's essential. They're mm-hmm. indispensable, mm-hmm. right? It's if you have that process where you make some plans, you go and execute, you learn, and you figure out like what you didn't know when you made the plan, because that's like half of it is like, when you get out in the field, then you learn things and you're like, okay, now that I know this, I change the plan. That's cool. Mm-hmm. Right. And everything in my life has turned out, even with what were some pretty, perceived as some pretty big downturns, better than I ever would have planned for.
Right.
Right. Because if you're prepared and you roll with the punches, it's amazing how some things turn out that like you were resisting. Mm-hmm. And then like maybe you're pushed through it because of this. Like for example, there are going to be some people that are listening to this podcast that now is the time they're going to have to make a decision on whether they're going to focus on getting a new job or writing full time. Mm-hmm. 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 And I'm not, each circumstance is different. All I would say is that whatever one you're going to do, go after it.
Go all in. Yeah.
Go all in. Right. And the stuff we're talking about here can be applied if you just found out you lost your job, right? And you've been sort of writing and you got some stuff going. There's no reason why you can't do the exact same thing we talked about, where you do some planning, you figure out how you actually may be in a situation where you've got some cash flow now that you didn't have mm-hmm. while you have more time to write, right? Is this the time where you go in? And the thing that would be the worst thing you could do is fret about it. Should I, shouldn't I? Should I, shouldn't I? No, pick one, do it. And if it's go get a job, then do that.
Right. Well, I think that because Sarah is risk averse, I am not risk averse. And while that's worked for me sometimes, it also has bit me in the butt sometimes. So, but I think having a plan can make both of us feel like we're, feel a little bit more in control. And mm-hmm. it keeps me from stepping over a line that maybe I shouldn't step over right now. And it, makes Sarah feel like she's got lines around her.
Lines everywhere. Yeah. That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you don't understand all the things that are in play. And I'll give you an example. So in the oil and gas industry, the previous business we were doing, our biggest investor, when the oil price crashed, we went to him. We were looking for more money, not because we were trying to bail anything out, but we just wanted to get aggressive and buy our competitors. And we just saw it as an opportunity to buy up. And we couldn't even get like responses from him. Mm. And what we didn't know is that like we were such a small investment for them, and they were party to two of the largest bankruptcies in the industry at that point. Uh-huh. So it's like, that's the other thing is that you're the center of your universe, but you're not the center of everybody's universe.
Right, exactly.
And that was a situation where like, okay, well, it doesn't matter what our grand plan is. Our biggest investor has said, this is our new plan.
Right. Exactly. We have appreciated this so much. It's helped me. I've taken notes over here. We appreciate it very much. So where can people find out more about you and all that good stuff?
Sure. So the easiest thing is to go to joesolari.com. That's JOESOLARI, one word. And there's you can sign up for my newsletter. There is a spot to sign up for one-on-one appointments with me. It's something I've always done for the author community. I've got a portion of each week, certain days set up where people can sign up. There's no cost, where we just talk about their business, whether you've got a specific question or you just need to bounce ideas off me, you can do that. And there's also that spreadsheet I mentioned where you can take your plan, put it in there, and then it has a way to stress test it where you say, okay, cut my sales by 20%, 30, 40, 50, and see where, where the leaks in the boat are.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, we'll link to that in the show notes. And you can find the show notes at wishidknownthenforwriters.com. And we'd love to hear from you or all our listeners. You can find Jamie on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram most of the time. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. We hope this episode inspired you, empowered you, and made you laugh a little bit too. If you loved it, tell your friends about it. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a review. We look forward to being with you again next week.